Hey chess friends, and heartily welcome to this video on an extremely exciting game. There's some danger the video may be long because I am so into this game. This is a very important game in my own life and my own chess history and career. It's also, in this series of games, the oldest game. This one was played when I was in high school and I'd only recently become a master, so it's one of my oldest games. It's my first win against an IM, an international master, and it's also from the first open tournament that I won. So I have games before then that were really important and exciting and memorable to me, but this is the first game at I guess a high enough level that it made it into these best games of all time. Of course, most of the games in this series are going to be from a decade later than this, when I myself was an IM and playing some of my best games against GMs. But this game here is probably the game that I've spent the most time thinking about in my life, or gone over the most times. It's a constant source of inspiration for me. When I want to try to remember what is my chess. What is my chess? What is my strength? What can I, do or bring to the game? When I'm trying to visualize that I can win a game or a tournament, or, when I'm going into some chess event, this thing here has often been the thing that's, has been one of the things that's really pumped me up a lot of the time. That also means that I thought about it during the game. I thought about it after the game. I have played over it hundreds of times. I have shown it to friends. I have, I've analyzed it in a notebook by hand for hours and hours. And I've eventually looked at a couple of the key moments with a computer, but only recently. But this game I've analyzed and looked at so many times with friends, without different perspectives. I've used it in teaching. So it's a game where there's like a lot of layers of thought and understanding of mine that go into it. It's a King's Gambit, which for a long time was my favorite opening. You could say there's a love-hate relationship, because the King's Gambit may also have hurt my career by keeping me from learning the Ruy Lopez and Italian games as well as I should have. I know them very, very badly. But yeah, you're going to see. Let's get into it. Here is starting position. Let's just get that King's Gambit on the board. My opponent, Walter Shipman, is a chess legend in his own right. I was excited to see him at tournaments before I ever got to play him. I was excited to play him for the first time. I've had the privilege of playing several good games against him. I think he may have been 70 by the time I started playing him. So he had been obviously a much stronger player when he was probably 20, 30, 40 years old. But it was still a privilege to play with him. And yeah, we had very different styles and strengths. So it's an interesting clash. But he believed in playing, classical moves and refuting things. So even though he wouldn't have offered the King's Gambit himself, he was always playing Catalans against me. He was one of the first players where I learned to play the black side of the Catalan from having to defend against him. But he believed in accepting it. He wouldn't hide from it. So the Musio Gambit is bishop to c4, g4, and then you castle and let black take your knight. The reason is that you don't want black playing queen h4 check maybe and messing up your king position. So this g4 move is considered sort of a threat here from black. Now, I have always liked the idea of playing this line here, which is called the Rosen-Trapper versus the Musio. And the idea here is not to checkmate the opponent as quickly on the f-file, but to dominate the center by setting up this strong pair of center pawns. And when the opponent plays g4, we don't even rush to castle. We take this pawn while developing nicely, controlling towards the center. And when black takes on f3, we recapture with the queen. And so the queen and bishop are both placed to help us control the center some more. So this is the starting position of the Rosen-Trapper Gambit in general, and you'll see that white has one pawn versus a knight at this point. First we sacked a pawn with the King's Gambit, then when black played g4 we sacked our knight for 2 pawns, so now we've got 1 pawn against the knight. It's a pretty heavy material investment, 5 or 6 moves into the game to have 1 single pawn against a knight, so this is a major gambit. It's at least like being down 2 pawns, but I would almost say in general, this gambit here feels like you're down more than 2 pawns. Why would I say that? Well, the knight's value is the highest early in the game, and then its value actually goes down over time. So, you know, sometimes if you had 2 pawns against a knight in an endgame, you would feel like the knight is not that easily beating 2 pawns, right? But this early in a game, an extra knight is of extreme value, can be used to attack your pawns, can be used to just take over the board and create mating attacks. So right now, black's got a lot of time to use that extra knight against the pawn. Also, early on in a game, in general, if you lose 1 or 2 pawns early or gambit them as losing them, you get open files in return for your pawns that you've gambited, which improves the value of your bishops and rooks faster than your opponents. So there's a certain kind of inherent compensation in pawn sacks in the opening that the knight sack is not going to give us. So in general, I have felt that being down 2 pawns in the opening is less committal than being down this knight for a pawn. This is committal in the sense that if white doesn't really do some good stuff and achieve some good stuff, they're very, very, very likely to lose. Whereas if you're down 2 pawns, there's a certain inherent compensation, and all you need to do is even win back 1 of those 2 pawns, and whether or not you would lose is already in question, right? Here it's, you know, you're basically lost unless you prove otherwise. All right, which I intend to prove. Now, what is the compensation? What is the point of this gambit? The compensation is all about center control. It's not about development. The white has a little bit, which is good. It's not about checkmating on f7, though you're allowed to threaten checkmate on f7. You know, it's not a stretch to imagine we might make a threat on f7 at some point in the game. But you can see that what white's emphasized most of all is central control. And that's something people sometimes don't understand about the King's Gambit, is that the King's Gambit is often played by people who love controlling the center with pawns. Look at it here. And I think one of the reasons people often get that wrong is they associate gambits with like the gambits from the Italian game, right? Such as Evans Gambit or Scotch Gambit, those kind of gambits, Molar attack. Those kind of classic gambits are around fast development and then attack. So a lot of times when you think of a gambit, you think fast development and attack. But does this f4 move look like it's developing white's pieces? Does this look like fast development? No. What this is being very greedy about spending time on your pawns, hoping to dominate the center, right? By removing your opponent's central pawn. And when it takes, you know, it's already kind of removed itself from the center. So the King's Gambit in general, I think often fits the temperament of people who really value central control. And that is the reason that I played this particular variation, the framework through which I understand this, and then a related opening or similar opening, the Cochrane Gambit against the Petrov, which is that variation where white goes knight takes e5, knight takes f7. That's again a situation where you trade a knight for 2 pawns. So it's not even like you're down that much material, but because you're giving up a knight so early, you're sort of losing unless you prove your case. And the case that white makes in the Cochrane and in the Rosen-Trapper is that this value and control of the center is worth something. What is it worth? The idea is that every single one of black's minor pieces should be worth less because white's central control is going to deny them their best squares. It's also going to make it harder for them to maneuver, right? To switch from queenside to kingside or kingside to queenside. So very often when you have a space advantage, one of the ways you'll see people with a space advantage playing is trying to be able to switch the action from one side of the board to the other, and the opponent's pieces will be slower or clunkier to transfer because they don't have as much space. So that's the idea here. right? It's that these pawns are making moves like knight c6 and knight f6 less desirable because we can just kick them away with our pawns, and those pieces have to find new squares. My opponent played d6, which back in the day for me was the main line. I also was aware of a main line where you play d5, which is offering a second pawn for white in exchange for messing with the flexibility of white's pawn center, right? I don't know if the next move would be bishop d6 because I never planned to play pawn takes pawn in this position, but let's say, for argument's sake, black played bishop d6. White has 2 pawns against the knight, but do you see how they are now immovable? They're blockaded. Yes, they take away some squares from the black pieces, but because they're inflexible, black just has to be able to find 1 or 2 squares that their pieces can go to, and then the pieces will be safe on those squares because these pawns can't react or move, right? They're blockaded. Their value is going to be much less. So my plan always against this d5 line was to play the move knight c3, sort of switching from we control the whole center to we're going for fast development if black would take on e4 and we would take with the knight, right? Now black has neutralized some of our center, but they've brought our knight from b1 to e4, and then we start looking for some more attacking ideas. But as I understand it, black really doesn't care about the pawn on d5 and would continue developing here to keep white's knight out of the center. And I always thought of this as being kind of like an alternate main line for black. At this point, with the knight unable to come to e4, white says the best I can do is take the second pawn. And, hope that the pawns in the central, etc., are enough compensation. So basically I had like 2 different ideas of like what the main lines are. One is sort of d6, bishop g7, knight c6, just developing pieces and going after d4, and the other is d5 immediately, sort of Falkbeer style, right? Counter Gambit, just come right back at the opponent in the very area of the board that they're claiming that they are commanding, right? So we get d6, and I played bishop c4 here. Another one of my greatest games or greatest memories of my chess career is I once beat a 2600 FIDE grandmaster, also in a classical tournament. Obviously, I don't count the blitz games. I've probably won a million blitz games in this opening, but I have also, knight c3 I think is also viable in this position. Bishop c4 has a little more of, maybe we make some threats to f7, maybe a few less options for black because of the threats. And knight c3 just says entirely like, we're not even pretending to make threats. We're just, controlling the center with our pieces. Super calm. And so that was my choice in a later game, which was also great fun. Okay, so here I went bishop c4, and my opponent played queen f6, which was pretty rare to me. I really expected bishop g7. I think this move came from a book on the King's Gambit I once borrowed from somebody and saw this line, and I think there may have been a line where white castles and lets black take on d4 with check, and I don't remember these lines, and they're probably not especially theoretically relevant anymore. I just kind of mentioned them to give you a sense of my outlook and experience on the opening at the time. I was a high school kid who'd been playing chess for maybe 5 years. Probably 5 years. So, I'd read a bunch of books, a few opening books here and there, mostly game collections and stuff like that. And for any fellow King's Gambit lovers out there, I want to give you, this is your game, so I want to give you the treat of, the whole perspective and how I view the King's Gambit, since it's an opening I've played a lot in my life. And I will also give all of my dear fellow King's Gambit players a piece of advice. Don't play the King's Gambit every game against e5. You got to learn the other openings too. Sorry. Get started on it sooner, or you'll never make GM like me. Okay. Probably. I mean, everybody has their own path. Okay, so I played knight c3, And the point is this queen's not really threatening to take on d4 yet. Queen takes d4. White has the tactic bishop f7 check. The king can't take because of bishop e5, winning the queen. So bishop f7 would, force the king to move. And then we've traded the d pawn for the f pawn. But, black's development is suffering. I mean, I could just put a random position on the board to give you a little sense. You could get something of this sort here. And you can feel, I hope, that white's development has been in a way jump-started by the black queen and king spending time moving. And it's switching from a position where we're going to maintain a big center. Obviously, we lost part of our center on d4. What we got in return for losing our center was rook d1 with tempo, right, with the queen and king on that file. And now you're going to turn to sort of direct attacking style of chess, and it looks very promising for white. So in general, it doesn't make a lot of sense for black to trade these two pawns, even though the d pawn is more valuable, because it creates some real issues for black's king. Now, what is the idea behind queen f6? Because, we normally say not to develop the queen too early or whatever. Well, the idea behind queen f6 is not so much to take on d4, but rather to restrain white from making threats on the f-file by putting the queen opposite white's queen. And also there are tactics against the bishop on f4. I remember one issue is that if you castle, then queen d4 becomes possible because you win this bishop over here. And notice the queen defends f7 once she takes the bishop. So I played knight c3, threatening knight d5. And so we have to understand, black wants to stop knight d5, and they do it with c6 in the game, but why wouldn't they do it with a developing move, knight e7? And the reason lies in the point of the queen on f6 is largely about some tactics with bishop h6. And so if you put your knight on e7, the knight doesn't control h6, and some of those tactics don't work. Most importantly, after knight e7, white could castle queenside. Now, the difference with c6 is that if white castles queenside, then you get to see the whole point of queen f6. Black plays queen f4 check, queen f4, bishop h6. So you trade off bishops and queens. Yes, we lose the f7 pawn. It doesn't matter. The endgame is really, really close to lost here when it simplifies, when the queens come off this early. Black still has ample time to try and use the knight and show its superiority over the two pawns. Okay, so you can't castle queenside here. You also sort of castling kingside. There's still kind of this issue, right? Here you could conceive of it, which we'll get to in a moment. So yeah, that's why black doesn't play knight e7, because they don't want to allow white to castle queenside. Now this position here I've often used as a puzzle for my students, sort of asking what's the best move for white. Black has just played c6, and so you might be starting to feel the development lead from white. You might be starting to feel frisky, as I did during the game, right? Black spent a move on queen f6 and then a move on c6. So they still have 4 undeveloped minor pieces. We got all of them out, and we're looking at bringing the rooks to f1 and d1 or e1 in the near future, right? So you could start getting excited here, for sure. Yeah, what white should do here is an interesting puzzle. And you can stop the video for a moment if you want to think about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and give the answer here. Any of you who are teachers, you can use this with your students because it's kind of a cool one. Here are the moves that I would first consider. Castles queenside, castles kingside, and e5. The castling moves are spending one more tempo, getting developed, getting a rook into the game. The e5 move is saying we're already so far ahead in development that if we can force a pawn trade by attacking the queen and pawn at once, then we just got to get that pawn trade done. You want to open the game when you've got a big development lead, which white does have by this point. 3 minor pieces is a sizable development lead. But of course, there's a good chance you could castle queenside or kingside and then play e5 next move anyway. All right, so here was my thinking. I calculated that castles queenside, queen f4 check line, right? And said, oops, I can't castle queenside. Then I castled kingside, and I kind of rejected that line as well. It goes queen d4 check, bishop e3, queen c4. Now in this position, I did see the move knight d5, interfering with the defense and threatening knight c7 as well as queen f7. And it is complicated. There is some juice for white. We are down 2 minor pieces already. So, if they take your knight, I mean, you can see queen f7, queen f8. That much I could calculate, right? So I'm not really offering a third piece sack. I'm just down 2 pieces already. And black could play a move like, I don't know, bishop e6, or maybe even pawn takes and let me take that bishop. So the line felt very risky to me. My instinct at the time, I basically saw the idea up to knight d5, and I just didn't really believe in it myself. And I've never really deeply double-checked if this move was right or wrong. Even though I've used this position as a puzzle, shows how deep people go, right? I mean, a game that I've looked at a million times and a puzzle I've used a million times. But I found an idea that I liked so much that I thought, yeah, that couldn't be right. Now, once you realize that you can't castle kingside or queenside, then the move e5 becomes more desirable, because you're like, oh shoot, the queen's position is preventing me from castling queenside or kingside. Those are the 2 main moves that would make e5 even better next move, right? So if I'm not castling here, what could I possibly do that makes the move e5 better? And so I thought of quickly 2 other moves that were possible. One is rook to d1, defending this pawn to prepare castling kingside. The other is rook f1, with the idea of preparing castling queenside. Right? Because if you castle kingside, you're probably going to play rook a to d1 or e1. And if you castle queenside, you're probably going to play rook h to f1 at some point. So those wouldn't be wasted moves, right? Those would be moves that could make sense, that could be somehow building the position. But against rook d1, I decided black could just play bishop h6. And the rook's not coming to f1 fast enough. To me, this just seems awkward. It seems like white is about to get some stuff traded potentially, right? So like bishop takes h6, queen f3, knight h6 is a disaster, and g3 messes with our plans pretty badly because we're trying to put our king over there now, and it's just awkward for white. You don't have to look much further to see that there's a problem. Now rook f1. Long ago I rejected this move. And the reason I rejected it was because I decided it still doesn't threaten castles queenside. Black has queen f4, bishop h6, even with the rook on f1. However, I think this is something where I eventually checked it with a computer after years of giving students this puzzle and saying that there was only one correct answer. And I found that there were 2 correct answers, and this is one of them. This move is also good, as good as the move I'd always given as the answer, queen e3. And the reason it's as good is that you can easily play queen e3 next move. The move queen d4 has only gotten even worse after bishop f7 check, because your opponent spent a move on c6 while we spent a move on rook f1. So there's nothing really useful for black to do. If they play bishop h6 looking to trade pieces, here you go queen e3. Compared to the position with rook d1, you've got time to not trade queens. And now the bishop h6 move has only made things even worse for black, right? Because you're getting your rook to f7 or something really quickly. Right? They're engaged. They're allowing you to trade or get rid of the bishop on f4 kind of with tempo in some sequence here. So it turns out rook f1 is just as good. There's nothing amazing black can do that avoids the move queen e3 next. And you may now have guessed what the unusual and hard to find move is that I long considered to be the answer to this puzzle. It's queen e3. Preparing either rook f1 or castles, because the queen covers d4. It doesn't prepare castles queenside because of still queen f4. but it does prepare castles kingside or rook f1. Those moves are going to come strongly. The queen's well placed here, actually better placed than on f3. She defends d4, and she's eyeing the king in case of an e5 move. So, a bit of a rare move, so I used it as an advanced opening puzzle for students. And it teaches you to sort of analyze some little 1 and 2 move sequences, reject the moves you most want to play, and keep looking for other candidate moves. And the fact that there are 2 answers doesn't spoil the puzzle. It can still be used now. There's just 2 right answers, and any number of wrong answers, but especially the ones that I talked about are plausible ones. So let's look at the last wrong answer, because it's the move played in the game. I played this move thinking that I would open up the game due to a large development lead. Ironically, this move ruins White's game because it keeps the position closed. It actually prevents us from opening the game. And the reason is that the pawn is going to get blockaded on e5 after a forced sequence. Black's going to move the queen with check. Okay. We can't play bishop g3, which would be an amazing move because of queen takes c4. So we have to play g3, queen g4. Now, we can't afford a queen trade. So here we have to lose a tempo. We adjust the queen, ironically, to the square she should have gone to before e5. How funny. And now Black blocks that pawn. Right? Also, we don't really want to trade bishops, so we kind of have to play another retreating move, which is really not e5 of us and not Gambit of us at all, right? To retreat the bishop to e2 here. So this is the position where I want to say, like, White's e5 move has been wrecked. And I think at this point in the game, I realized that my e5 move had been an abject failure because the pawn on e5 is now blockaded. It's going to block my bishop. It's going to block the e file. We were much better off with the pawns on d4 and e4 where they were flexible than to have one of them traded and the remaining one blockaded like this. Again, a blockaded situation allows your opponent to figure out exactly where they want their pieces. You can't kick them with any of your center pawns. It gives up a lot of White's advantage. I think White had a big advantage before e5, by the way. I know I have to pause and check myself. You're talking about White's advantage in this like crazy piece sack King's Gambit. But yes, I believe that instead of e5, if White played queen e3 or rook f1, I think it basically refutes the queen f6 defense, which I think is dubious, right? This queen f6 defense, walking into knight c3, and then you have to pay taxes with c6. It's awful. And actually White has an advantage. But this e5 move has just blown White's entire advantage. And now I'm retreating, and Black's playing queen g6, and the position might even be slightly better for Black, but it's like White's advantage is definitely gone. It's either equal or slightly better for Black. Now, something about my attitude. At this point, I realized that e5 had been a mistake. I realized that I'd botched the position and that I was probably worse. Nevertheless, I did not play the following sequence. Bishop d3, queen g4, bishop e2, queen g6, bishop d3. You can chase the Black queen until she goes to g7, which is a worse square for her, right? She prevents bishop g7, and she doesn't control this diagonal. She doesn't control the blockade square. So in theory, I know that somebody in this position should play bishop d3. Okay? But I was afraid that maybe my opponent would repeat positions. Even though, I thought that my opponent had the advantage, I still didn't want a draw. Now, logically, I could have repeated once, and then if my opponent didn't go to g7, I could have then kept going as I did in the game. But my disdain and contempt for draws was so high that I'm not even going to pretend to do any repeating ever, even when I feel like I'm down a piece for almost nothing against an IM. So I castled queenside. My opponent developed. I played knight e4, which introduces ideas of knight d6 and knight f6. And one of the few things you can do, this is a real general chess lesson, take a note in your mind here. One of the few things you can do with a blockaded pawn is use the outpost squares that the pawn is defending. Sometimes if it's really, really important that your opponent keep a pawn of yours blockaded in place, You can even come into squares like this if they're defended even by a pawn, right? Like your opponent could have a pawn on e7, but if they really can't afford for this e-pawn to get out of your way, knight f6, knight d6, these are the kind of moves that use that pawn, that use the blockaded pawn, because it becomes almost illegal for your opponent to capture pieces that end up on those squares sometimes. So here it's not illegal for black. I mean, they can't stop me from playing one of these moves, and they'll trade, and I'll get the pawn partly out of the way. You know, so that could have happened in the game. But anyway, this is, you know, a very, very common use of a blockaded pawn. Okay, my opponent plays bishop d5. Now here, let me just say my annotations and my comments on this game are going to be at odds with a computer engine. So if you're an absolute abject computer monkey, you can just go ahead and post your hateful comment in the YouTube comments and say, lol, he's been studying this game for 20 years and he's completely wrong about everything about the game. You know, he's about to give his next move a double exclam instead of a double question mark, blah, blah, blah. Go ahead, you can do that. But despite having computer checked a few things, I'm still preserving some of my original assessments and thoughts, which are very turn of the century human thoughts. And that's just the way I'm going to do it. So you may or may not understand it. We'll see if the presentation makes any sense to some of you. I'm going to call this move a clear mistake. Now, this is a very tricky position for black. This position here would be a great puzzle as well, as like an opening puzzle, how to play as black. Black has the advantage. I think almost anyone could look at this and be like, yeah, I don't believe that white has enough for a piece here. They'd probably be right. You know, most of us could make that snap judgment correctly. But how many of us could find like how to play this position as black? I think very few. There's a way to find it, but I think it's pretty difficult. But anyway, I call bishop d5 a clear mistake. And I say it's easy to overlook what's wrong with this move as black, which is my double exclam / double question mark move that I play against it. And I think black didn't see it coming, and I think it's a great losing move for white. Also, to find the right move is very hard. But with all that said, the blockade of the e5 pawn is basically the best thing in black's position other than the extra knight. So unblockading that pawn is not super logical, and the move bishop d5 also seems motivated by maybe taking the knight or the rook, which is not what I would be prioritizing here as black, right? Black's problem in this position, if we want to try and solve this and go through a whole thought process, if you guys want to stay with me and work on this game for 2 or 3 hours here, the problem is that there aren't a lot of good moves you can play as black, even though your position is good. For example, you might like to castle queenside, but there's queen a7, right? Or you might like to develop your knight, but on f6 there's a pawn attacking it. If you go to e7, you free up the move knight d6 check, completely wrecking you. And you could look at knight h6, plausibly, I think. And then I would guess that the issue is knight d6. I don't even remember this, and I haven't gone through every single line. I've refreshed the game, I've improved some lines, but there's limits to everything we can go through. Is this a problem for black? The knight's hanging, but it gets a move to move away. This looks okay for black. I don't remember for sure what's wrong with knight h6 here. And if white takes the knight, then you get knight d6 check, but at the end you lose your queen. So that's not going to be worth knight d6 check. I do remember thinking that the best move in this position for black, maybe I'm wrong because maybe I haven't computer checked it, is h5. And the reason was to be able to develop the knight to h6 with extra support from the rook, so the bishop could continue its task of defending the dark squares against this knight. Okay, I apologize for not being able to properly prove every single point here. It's a very massive game with a lot of complicated bits and bobs. so it's hard to ever get everything about it completely correct, which is going to be part of my explanation for this next phase of the game, where I'm going to do some more sacrificing. Is basically that the game's going to be so complicated that we have to consider the difficulty level and the human element, not just what a computer evaluation would tell us. So after bishop d5, I play this move e6. I give it a double exclam. The computer says it's not quite good enough. This move also on move 16, e6 as a pawn sack, is how Kasparov beat Kramnik's Berlin Wall years later in Astana on the exact same 16th move of the game. That's a really great game of a very different style, but the same move. So just a funny little coincidence that helped me feel connected to my chess teacher from a distance, inspiration, the person I sort of modeled my chess on for the first 10 to 15 years of my chess career. Okay, what does this move do? It basically says white doesn't want this e5 pawn. So if you give me any chance to get rid of it, I'm going to get rid of it. And this e6 is a more permanent solution than the move knight to d6 check or knight f6, right? So we could play a move like this and get rid of the e pawn using the check. But to me, the pawn's still like on the board, blocking one of my files, either on d6 or f6, right? So at the time, I didn't think knight d6 or knight f6 was good enough. But now, when I reviewed this with the computer, I found this cool move, which I had not seen at the time. And the computer says that down a full rook, it's basically compensation. King d7, queen e5, I think, defending this pawn, which is a little bit of a thorn in black's pieces, even if I wanted to get rid of it. And preparing inroads with queen c7 or rook to d1. And white has enough. So apparently, that's proper play for white, for what it's worth. Even though I didn't think knight d6 or knight f6 was a good enough way of getting rid of the e-pawn, I did consider both moves, and I did not see rook to d7. Mainly because I didn't really believe in these moves, so I didn't look at them very long, right? And that's why so much of how you play chess is related to your instincts and what you believe as you're playing the game. Like, do you believe you're better? Do you believe you're worse? If you believe you're worse, then you might not see a line that's good for you because you don't expect it to be there and you're not looking for it, right? Do you believe the position is simple? Maybe then you'll move quickly and miss a complicated move. Do you believe the game is complicated? Maybe you'll waste a bunch of time instead of doing something really simple and obvious. And then later you'll lose the game because you spent too much time earlier. So all the ideas we have about, like, I need to get rid of this blockaded pawn, or this is or is not the time to sacrifice, all those things have a huge effect on what we look at. So basically, I didn't look very long at knight d6 or knight f6 because my instinct was that they were probably not good enough and that e6 was probably brilliant. Turns out I was a little bit wrong about that, but I still think this is a really cool move. Part of it is black has 5 captures here: bishop, pawn, queen, as well as e4 with the queen or the bishop, right? So I calculated a mass of variations, and I really enjoyed calculating back in the day. So I like that I did a bunch of correct calculations here, and I will share a few of them with you just because I love variations, and that's part of the point of this game, is a bunch of cool variations. So let's start with maybe taking the knight. I think black does play the best move, by the way, which is, we can say on principle this would be the best move, and it turns out in calculation that is the best move as well. You want to block the file with the cheapest piece, right? And we can see that any version of taking the knight on e4, white at least gets a knight back on d7. So as black, depending how much time you want to invest, you may or may not double check all of the variations with queen e4 and bishop e4 like I did. But as white, I mean, I have to calculate all those things before leaving my stuff hanging. I feel like that's my responsibility to the degree of chess I'm hoping to play. But yeah, the correct move is going to be to block the file with the cheapest piece, the pawn, because that's going to be the hardest for white to get out of the way to get at the black king. But let's look at capturing on e4 first. Bishop takes e4. This is a fun and not so hard but beautiful variation. Pawn takes knight check. King here, blockading. Still trying to use that blockaded pawn. If that pawn were gone, you see how dead the black king might be. And then you'll get my feeling and my motivation that I kept trying to get rid of that pawn, right? I just want that pawn gone because like I can feel that that one pawn of mine is the one thing that's keeping me from checkmating black's king. And then when you get an idea like that, it's a powerful idea, but it has its limitations. Like sometimes you'll get something wrong because of it, right? Like I guess you could say in theory my e6 move was wrong. It was motivated by a general concept that this pawn was in the way and I want to get rid of it, which is motivating me to find some good moves, but it's also going to bias your thinking in a way where you'll get some things wrong because it is always case by case. Here, we can break the blockade of this pawn with a beautiful combination. First, queen a7, trapping the rook on a8. It's got nowhere to go, so I mean, black pretty much has to take it. Queen takes rook check is a hefty threat, so black takes the queen. Then we throw in the bishop, breaking the blockade decisively. And next move, pawn to d8 equals queen. If the king's on c7, it's checkmate at 1. If the king's on e7, it's checkmate in a couple. Don't worry about it. It's checkmate. So that's beauty number 1. Now here's quite a long variation, which gives a sense of how much I calculated back then. When I was younger, basically my chess was just based on calculating millions of variations. I mean, I had my ideas. Everybody's got their ideas. I had my ideas. You see how they're kind of guiding me. I want to get rid of the pawn that's blockading. I want to bring out my pieces. I want to checkmate the king. I've got some ideas, but I spent a lot of time just calculating masses of variations. So here's the calculation. You take, and the king can't take the pawn because of queen takes queen, right? But beyond that, black wants this blockading traitor pawn, right? So they try and leave it on d7. Now here's a very long variation to get that pawn off of d7. Queen c3, tempo on the rook. There's actually only one way for black to stop queen h8, really, which is pawn f6. Knight f6, queen takes knight check. Doesn't look like you need to really calculate it. So f6, so that gives us a tempo. Then the queen continues her voyage. She's trying to get in. She's trying to break the blockade of that pawn, right? She attacks the square. You could see it as trying to checkmate or just trying to get that pawn to move because the king could move away. We would sack that pawn. b6, keeping the queen out. Queen a6, trying to get into b7, at which point the rook on a8 will be trapped, and then she'll go into c7. So c5 to defend that square. And now that black's moved the pawns off of b7 and c6, suddenly this diagonal becomes super juicy. The light squares become super important. The bishop is no longer solidly defended by a pawn on c6, and we give a rook. Black can take on d5 or h1. It's still only one rook sack, but there's a beauty to the symmetry of it. And it's very symmetrical because queen d5 will go rook d1, tempoing the queen, and queen h1 will go rook d1, also tempoing the queen. So it doesn't... Black could take either way, and the variations are basically still the same. The queen needs to keep the white queen out of b7. So her job is still to stay here. And then we play bishop g4 after all of this. And black cannot now prevent us from getting rid of this pawn. Basically, we're going to play queen c8 using the square defended by the blockaded pawn. Right? We're going to go queen c8, rook c8, pawn c8, double check, new queen, and just rout black. I looked one or two moves further than this during the game just to make sure there's no move here that stops queen c8. Like, for example, knight e7, defending that square with a knight, and we're still just going into the blockade square. Right? Force the king out, and then mop up however you like. Maybe rook d7 with checkmate is more precise to some people. So anyway, so that's, I think, a beautiful, beautiful variation for an avid chess-playing teenager to calculate. Let's go back. So that's queen e4 and bishop e4. Then there is, you can take on e6 with the queen. And now I think another beautiful move, bishop to g4. And this kind of shows, oh, sorry, I forgot to say something about this. This theme of trying to get rid of the blockading pawn, like I say so much about the calculation, but also there being like ideas. This theme of trying to get rid of your own blockading pawn repeatedly, I've used this theme in many, many games, not just, here, many, many games. Some other games in among my best games ever include this theme of just pushing the pawn, and eventually when I break through and sack it on the 7th or 8th rank, that's the end of the resistance. Okay, so now let's get to this. So here it's a bunch of calculation, but I'm again going to highlight my point about, in general, when capturing on e6, black wants to block this file with the cheapest piece possible because it's the hardest to get rid of, right? So if there were a pawn on e6, the move bishop g4 wouldn't threaten black very much. But with a queen on e6, it's a big threat, and black's got a big problem, right? If they take the bishop over here, then there's knight f6 check, followed by queen e8 mate, or knight g4. If they play f5, then there's bishop takes f5 crashing through. If they play queen e7, then they're allowing knight d6, right? So the valuable piece is not able to keep white's pieces at bay. So I think my main variation is queen e4 takes. King can't take because of the queen again, right? If king d8, it's worse for black because bishop takes check, and we clean up this piece here. Black's done for because we win back our piece and more. But even on king e7, I had noticed that trading queens and playing rook e1, you win this bishop straight up in the middle of the board, and then you just have a winning bishop pair versus bishop and knight endgame, plus the black king's still under raging attack. So if like f5, there's bishop takes f5, and the bishop still goes, or knight f6, bishop g5, and the bishop on e4 still goes. So that shows clearly that queen e6 doesn't work. Then finally there's bishop e6. I didn't calculate this move very much at the time of the game. I just thought, great, they play bishop d5, bishop e6. I got rid of my e-pawn for free. I figured any normal move here would be good for white. And to me, normal moves are bishop d3, knight g5, and rook e1. And they're all good. But also, I will mention, again, a move I missed during the game. It's the same move as in that other knight f6 check line, right? This rook takes d7 move is actually good for white after an insane calculation. Which I don't think I need to show you another insane calculation if it's not one that I did as a kid. It's not critical to the whole game, because also I think it's true that white could just play something like bishop d3, threatening to win the queen with knight d6 check, queen g7, rook e1. I mean, that's a lot of attacking pieces. We can see black's in trouble. And you can see that white's better off without the e-pawn than with it, right? Slap the e-pawn back onto e5, and it's like, oh, maybe black's a little bit better. Take it off, and it looks like black's dead, to my mind. Okay, so e6 comes in. My opponent plays the best move, fe6. And now, maybe I should play something like bishop d3 or whatever, but that was not my point. Knight to g5. Okay, maybe it's another blunder, but I'm going to call it a great move as well, like e6. The verve and the feeling are there, right? I'm willing for black to take another rook in the corner, and then I'll play knight e6 with some kind of brutal attack, is the idea. However, it's a little more complicated than that, even for human analysis, and then you add in computer analysis, it gets even more complicated. My opponent plays a terrific move, bishop c5, developing instead of taking the rook. However, how bad would it have been to take the rook? Well, first of all, knight e6, there is let's see, I think there's one move that can kind of defend. It's knight f6, I think. White's threatening the move bishop h5, winning the queen because of knight g7 check. That's the number one threat. Number two threat would be like knight c7, knight a8. But remember, we just gave a whole rook. We didn't even have the time to recapture it. So even knight c7, knight a8 doesn't like win the game for white. It just keeps the game interesting. So the big threat is bishop h5, and the moves that prevent it would be either knight f6 or king f7. King f7 fails because of rook takes knight on d7 check. So the one defense for black would have been knight f6, and then I think the best I could find was check here, and a repetition. Because actually, if we take the rook on a8, we're still behind a piece for white, and black can just put a piece on d5, kind of starting to blockade the d file. So actually, from a computer perspective, this is only equal if black went for the rook. Bishop c5 is actually a great move, though. I'm going to genuinely give it an exclam. I loved it during the game. I mean, in a oops, that hurts kind of way. And I loved it in analysis. And even the computer loves it and says, actually, black is better with bishop c5. So we're all going to love it on every count. It tempos the queen instead of taking the rook. And you hit the queen with the bishop. You develop the knight on the next move. So suddenly black has full development and white's down a piece for 0 pawns. King looks pretty snug because black's got this amazing interconnected defense contraption in the middle here. I mean, that looks like quite a clump to get through. Like white would need some pawns or some minor pieces to trade and break their way through it. How are we going to do it? We don't have enough left. And next move, black should be able to castle queenside or kingside with basically a winning position. However, I think the strongest thing in my chess game, or maybe like the one quality that I've had as a chess player that is a little bit unusual or special to me, is that in super complicated positions, it becomes more and more obvious to me what's the most important thing and what the crux of the position is. For many people, in simple positions are easier to play, and more complicated positions are hard to play. They get sort of confused or disoriented. But for me, it's always been basically the opposite. In the very simple positions, I can't really tell what matters anymore. It all looks sort of the same. And in super complicated positions, I understand exactly what the priorities are and what each player needs to do. So in this messy position, I understood immediately that there was still a little bit of a weakness on the e6 square, that this piece wanted to come out and rook e1 into this bishop was a little bit slow, and that I needed to make some inroads into that clump I told you about, right? So I just eliminated the key piece that was holding anything together. Rook takes d5. Exclam. My opponent plays a lot of good moves this game as well. C takes d5, exclam. Seeing that the white knight is going into e6, a lot of people would be tempted to just take with the e pawn to have one extra pawn, right? But this game, black's material advantage is like a rook plus. So counting pawns is not really particularly pertinent. What's really important is for black to have the possibility of playing rook c8, potentially dealing with knight c7, potentially protecting the bishop, potentially starting counterplay against white's queen and king on the c file. So if black played ed5, okay, knight e6 immediately is a bad blunder to queen e4, hitting the rook and knight. I don't even remember if I saw that in the game or not, but white has to play bishop d3 first, kicking the queen. And then if black plays queen h5, knight e6, and it threatens the bishop, it threatens the rook, and it threatens the queen. White's down a whole rook, but we're not going to go into great detail on this particular line. You're just going to believe me or completely not believe me that white has fair play here after knight e6. The queen has a different direction it could go, queen g8, keeping the knight out of e6 for a move. But after rook e1 check, again, white has enough. When the king moves, the knight is going to come into e6 with check. And then, even if you consider at minimum taking on c5, you'll see that white is only giving an exchange sack, and black's rooks and king all are badly placed. So hopefully some of you will believe me on that one. That seems pretty clear. So, terrific move from the opponent, c takes d5. This takes the sting out of knight e6 to c5 or knight e6 to c7 in many cases. I rejected knight e6 on account of rook c8 way back then, but queen e4 wins even clearer and faster. So I played the correct move anyway, bishop d3. This was my point anyway. I was always intending to improve the piece. That was part of the sac. And although this game is may look to some people like super complicated, crazy tactical, one of the themes of this game is that white continually improves whichever piece has become their worst placed piece. So in this position, I didn't only want to take the rook on h and move it to e1 and improve my worst placed piece. I actually thought like, oh, maybe I can improve this bishop and this rook, because I knew the bishop on e2 would be the next worst placed piece once I played rook e1, right? So here, the idea was always to throw in bishop d3 against cd or ed. Big choice for black between queen g8 and queen h5. And I think when I put this position, I think I may have glanced at this position with a computer once, and it mentioned that queen h6 is also a candidate move for black, which never occurred to me. To put the queen on the diagonal of this bishop, basically, never occurred to me. I always assumed she was going to g8 or h5, and to my mind, it's like it's a bit of a toss-up. If you go to h5, the black queen is out of play and can end up not having a way back from h5. If you put the queen on g8, then she's still participating in the defense. She's in the right kind of position for a queen, right? Tucked back there, defending the pawn. She could go to g7 or f8 or e7 at some point. But if you go queen g8, you trap your rook for a while, which has a certain awkwardness to it. So very, very tough choice for black. If queen h5, then we're going to maybe go knight e6 before rook e1, because we threaten knight to g7 check. So we get these moves in. And this is the only move that's plausible for black, not trapping in the rook compared to like, king f8 or king g8 or something. And notice that in this position here, knight c5 loses to rook c8. But if black had a pawn on c6, then knight c5 would be an advantage for white. But okay, knight g5 check, king g7, and then we just go bishop here. Now this move threatens to simply capture that knight because this one's pinned. And if the knight moves from d7, then the bishop would be hanging. So black has to play d4, and then we can play queen d2, taking the last square away from black's queen. So she's essentially trapped over on h5 right now. And again, you may or may not believe me, white is down a full rook, but I think an interesting game continues. Still an absolute mess. Chances for both sides. Okay, my opponent went queen g8. And here you see me improving my worst placed piece again. This was kind of the plan. I'm bleeding material, but I still have a few more pieces left, and they're continually coming to their best squares. And here black commits the fatal error of the game, castling queenside to evacuate the king, who is scared of these two pieces, right? And also by moving the king, you sort of coordinate the heavy pieces a little bit more, make room for maybe these pieces to get out from where they're kind of stuck. But because the bishop covers this diagonal, the king ends up being worse, or at least as bad over here. So it doesn't help at all. And white's basically winning by force after this move. So what should black do? Well, I spent a long time writing variations after knight e4 in my notebook. I came up with this idea like pawn sack, trade a piece, slow down the attack on the e file considerably. And even long ago, I had in my analysis, I'd come up with this. This was after the game. This was not in-game stuff that I had seen. This is now stuff that I did in my notebook shortly thereafter. I'd correctly found this idea of bishop b5, switching over to attacking this knight, incidental threat on the bishop, top defensive move for black, bishop e7, rook to d1, right? We don't take on e4. We don't go after e6. We just focus on this knight. I know we're down a whole rook, but if we win the knight back, then it's an exchange down position where the bishop pair is quite well placed and the black king doesn't have a perfect castled position to get to anywhere. So there's going to be continuing attacking chances against the king. As long as you win back the exchange, white is fine. So rook d8. Here the move bishop c7 doesn't work. Long calculation. Correct is queen c7. Going after the knight. Should I show why bishop c7 doesn't work? It's all very interesting. Queen g5 check. King to b1. Now queen b5 is not good. After queen h8 check. Here takes. If king takes queen f8. Otherwise white's up material. Queen e2 attacking the rook. Queen d4. Defends the rook, and by threatening the knight, black doesn't have time to take the bishop. So that's kind of the end of my variation there mainly. But black has the great move. Queen g5 check and then castle. The point of the check, again, is not material. It's to re-coordinate that queen and rook that were so badly placed, right? That tempo to reconnect them. And now, whatever white does, they're worse. For example, if you try and take the whole knight, you get back rank mated. And if you take the rook, and black takes over here, giving back all the material. But after rook f1, suddenly all white's initiative is spent. Their own first rank is a problem, and this e-pawn is potentially a very dangerous resource for black. So black, yeah, gets out of all trouble in that variation. So bishop c7 dubious because of that. Better queen c7, just winning the knight. Queen g6, bishop d7 check, king here. The king seems to be running. Of course, it would be a game even if the king were escaping. I mean, you could play queen b7 and just keep playing the game with this bishop pair against rook pair. But rook f1, I believe, is just winning. Right? You're threatening some version of bishop e5 or bishop h6 check, messing up the black position too much. Or maybe even bishop d6 tactically might be good in some cases. So I tried moving the king away in a way that still lets the rook out. Again, I'm just going to say that if the king ever plays a move like king g8, like, it just doesn't work for black with the rook on h8. There's nothing to think about or analyze. So king g7, bishop b5, threatening the bishop on e7. And yeah, at minimum, to save that bishop, black has to give back the exchange, and you can see white's just ahead in every way: king safety, material, pawn structure, and so forth. So knight e4, I mean, it's close. You can see white's not winning by a mile, but they're kind of winning. But so knight e4 was a tough move. I spent a lot of time analyzing that. And I found this move here, which to me seemed like the best defensive move. And then the point is to play bishop e3 check. Again, thank goodness for no c6 pawn. So the best I could find for white is you go bishop f5, attacking e6 with more pieces, and now black plays an improved version of knight e4. Oof. And after knight e4, d e4, if you play rook e4, trying to say that you played a useful move as well here with bishop f5 in the meantime, it turns out after rook c6, white just can't break through. Like, the e6 pawn just gets defended, and we're down a whole rook, you know, for one or two pawns and threats here, and it's not enough. I mean, it's not completely toasty dead, but much better is for the bishop to backtrack, preventing rook c6. I mean, not fully preventing it. I suppose black could give back an exchange here, right? But then we're back in the territory of, okay, we only need comp for one knight, right? And I think also that there would be this nice move, bishop e5 right away afterwards. Maybe try and trap the rook, or is there queen g5 check and castles again? Ugh, that variation, so annoying. Yeah, so after bishop e4, I played like king f7, queen b3, rook e8, bishop f5, and yeah, in this version, there's still a big battle to be fought, right? Black has not yet gotten these pieces out. I think it's very plausible for black, this rook c8 move. And here's a move that I didn't think of, you know, for those who want to learn lessons from computers. The computer suggests this move. I never thought of it. I just thought, oops. But apparently it's playable. Like, not clearly winning or losing. White can take on e5 with the rook or the bishop. But as a human, that move's kind of insane. Maybe nowadays, human players find moves like this, and it's relevant. But yeah, that's more madness, but nothing that I've analyzed in depth myself. That would be a bunch of computer variations if I wanted to show you variations after this move. And I don't have anything really valuable to say about those variations, even though I've looked at them a little bit this past week. So my opponent castled, and remember what I said about when you've got an idea, it can help you find great moves, but also occasionally blind you to moves that don't follow your idea. This is a case of that, although it doesn't cost me much, but I think I played the second most crushing move here with knight e6. Why? I'm trying to improve all my pieces. When my opponent castles away from my pieces, look how fast I rearrange the pieces towards that king, right? The knight on g5, worst piece, it heads towards the king. Rook e8, bishop f5. This bishop, I'd improved it from e2. It was aiming at some useful squares. Once the king castled over here, we reposition it. So I have this tool, right? Take the worst placed piece, figure out what's the most important thing in the position, aim it at the most important area, always, improving the pieces. But it can also lead to some small mistakes, because here, let's say knight e6 weren't completely winning, I would have missed this move, rook e6, which is completely winning. It obviously gets in the way of the knight, so the knight's never going to join the game. We're just going to win the game before the knight ever rejoins the game here. It threatens this beautiful rook c6, pawn c6, bishop a6 checkmate. So it's just like a weird moment where just slamming your rook in the middle of the board is great. Normally rooks like to be on squares like e1, and knights like to be on squares like e6, right? So this may be like an obvious move, just threatening mate in 2, and what's black supposed to do? It turns out nothing. But to a human, you slam your knight on e6 and your rook's already happy. Why would you be improving the rook? The knight's threatening the rook, it's threatening the bishop, it's like getting your queen to c7. So, I think it's very, very inhuman to not slam knight e6. Now, if knight e6, if I calculated a bit and we're completely losing, maybe I could find rook e6. We don't know, because in the game I calculated knight e6 is completely winning, so I played it. I never had to push myself to find anything else. But like after rook e6, the only defense I could think of for black was moving the rook to clear a flight square for the king. That was really the only thing I saw to prevent rook here. And then, of course, very simple move for white. You just take the knight. And this knight's busy stopping queen c5. So now, as you can see, black's just dead, right? They still can't improve their pieces, and they're not even really up material anymore. Okay, but knight e6, it's good. We improve all the white pieces. Rook e8, I've, of course, foreseen, and the point is that if you try and take on c5 to come checkmate, black's going to play rook e1 check, right, diverting your queen, and then they can recapture. And life goes on. But yeah, I just brought the bishop, and now, of course, we're threatening knight c5 when the knight on d7 won't be able to move, and we'll have queen takes back on e1. Now let me tell you one little funny thing about this game off the board. I was playing on board 1, my first time playing on board 1 in an open tournament. And on board 2, there were an IM and a GM playing each other. And throughout this game, they had been basically silently mocking me. Now, you may say, how do you even know when everybody's silent in a tournament? Well, they would look at my position and they would shake their heads, right? Or I would play some sacrifice and they would look at each other and kind of like wink, like, oh, kids, kids just, they're crazy, And they were just making these like facial expressions, spending a lot of time watching my game instead of their game. And essentially it was like very clear that they were just laughing about how bad I was. And for one thing, this shows how when you have certain assumptions or ideas, right, it can blind you to what's going on, because they, in this position, still thought that I was dead lost and they were laughing at me up till the moment I played the most devastating move perhaps of my life. One of the most devastating moves that, you or I or anybody has ever seen. And up till that point, they were laughing at me because they're assuming, kid, King's Gambit, low rating. They're just assuming that Walter Shipman, who they know, is going to clean up the game and teach me something. So d4 attacking the queen, and now queen c5, a move at which the players on board too, like, eyes exploded, mouths open, gaping, electrified, and my opponent as well. Once you see the move, it's not particularly difficult to calculate, especially compared to everything you guys have worked through so far today, so good on all of you. But there's an unexpected element to it. Obviously, if my opponent attacked the queen with a pawn, they didn't think I was threatening queen takes c5. The assumption was I was threatening knight takes c5, right? And so in this position, the main other candidate move you might expect for black is b6, defending the bishop. And black may have worried about b6, b4, kind of trying to continue the attack from that side. So played d4, kicking the queen, but queen c5, check. Only one legal move, knight c5, knight c5. And if the king moves away, so my opponent's forced to just give back every single piece they have. Knight d7 just to attract the bishop so that knight b7 check is no longer mate, right? The king can get out there. But rook e8, queen e8, bishop e8, and somehow white's up material, right? If they took on e8, I get another pawn on b7, so they played b6 to save the pawn. But either way, I've got two pieces and a pawn against the rook. The rest of the game doesn't matter. I had terrible endgame technique, but I mean a bishop pair, it's not so hard to use. And in that case, I just improved my worst placed piece one more time, I guess, right? It took me 2 moves to start doing it. First, I made sure the rook couldn't do anything. I'm very pawn structural. And then I just improved the worst placed piece, the king, right? Okay. What happens here is the fastest I've ever consumed an opponent's army in a game. 1, 2, 3 minor pieces, rook and queen in 5 moves. Look how fast black's pieces die. I spent so long sacking mine, right? And theirs just disappear in 5 moves. The last detail that we'll mention is that if black played b6 in this position, rather than playing b4, white can play the more attractive, symmetrical queen f6. And if knight f6, knight c5, you get the exact same combination. And of course, if black doesn't take white's queen, well, there's no resistance left to speak of in black's position, now is there? Look at how well placed all the white pieces are, right? We've achieved our goal as a King's Gambiter of controlling the center. All right, so that's my game. That's kind of like the Immortal Pruess King's Gambit, perfectly encapsulating the kind of player I was from about age 14 to 20 or 24, major phase of my chess career. Believed in controlling the center, dominating the center, and then turning that into king hunting. That was, for me, part of the point of controlling the center was make their pieces worse, and then wherever the king goes, be able to maneuver my pieces side to side and attack the king, ideally. If you've got any questions about the game, variations I missed, go ahead, put them in the comments. If you just enjoyed it, you can drop a thumbs up, and I'll agree with you. Very, very fun stuff. And I hope you enjoy that game. Memorize it, show it to your grandkids, just like I have and will do. And next up will be game 6, which I guess by definition should be better than game 7. No, wait, this was game 8 on the list of top 10. Game 8. So next up should be game 7, which should be even better than game 8, according to our judges. So if you like this, the next one will be even more delicious. See you then.